Two friends meet up to drink some beers and talk about past times. Not yesterday, but long ago, it's scandals, wars and crimes. From Stalin's reign to Prohibition, Tudors, Pompey, Bush and NASA's mission, Edison's bulk, Genghis Khan's rise to victory. Forget your old teacher, it's time for Pint-Sized History.
Hello and welcome to the Pint-Sized History podcast with me, Zach.
And me, Joe.
And today we're back for another episode of the podcast where we go through the events that happened in the past that have shaped the world we live in today. And typically when we use that tagline, it tends to be a good episode, and I have complete confidence that today will be a fantastic episode because Joe, I'm going to spoil it for him, not to say it
Go for it, you're fine.
Today we're doing it. This is the first part, the 3-part epic through the Roman Empire. And it's something that before I did not want to tackle because I was looking at it and thinking, yeah, I sort of understand what happens in Rome. You got Republic, and then you got the dictatorship under Caesar, and then you got the empire, and it's followed by the Western and the East Roman empires. And it's so much to unpack that I did not want to get my hands dirty with it at all. But Joe has kindly decided for all of you to take it upon himself, take on the mantle. Take on Caesar's mantle. And as always, if you really enjoyed the podcast, then please be sure to like and subscribe and follow, leave comments, and tell your friends about us, because it is nice getting people to talk to. Make sure we're not doing this to the empty airwaves. But yeah, I guess I just want to hear what you have to say, Joe. What do you have to say for yourself?
Well, thank you for explaining that intro so beautifully, Zach. You really set the stage. But I'm going to one-up you and set the stage even further with a little story. So I'm going to sit us down, get on your bums, get your hands together, start twiddling and listen to this epic story that I'm about to give, this lovely story that I'm about to give, to set the stage of what we'll be talking about over the next 3 episodes, a 3-parter, like he said. It is the 700s BC, so a long time ago.
Before Christ, baby.
Yeah, before Christ. Praise. The priestess virgin, Rhea Silvia, lived by the river Tiber, which is near the western coast of modern-day Italy. Here, she was raped by the Roman god of war Mars and became pregnant with twin boys. These boys were born Romulus and Remus, but they were in trouble before their lives had even begun. Rhea Silvia was in fact the daughter of the former king Numitor. Very, like, there's some... Well, some of these words give me big Lord of the Rings vibes.
Yeah,
like Numitor sounds quite...
Numitor.
I do wonder if there's a little bit of influence there. Anyway,
the island kingdom of Numenor.
Numenor, I know. So, yeah, the king Numitor is Silvia's father. However, Numitor is no longer the king. He had been displaced from the throne by his brother, Amulius. And the new king, Amulius, was not too pleased at this potential double threat to his kingdom. He ordered the boys be seized and thrown into the river Tiber. But as the river was in flood at that moment, they were abandoned instead, the soldiers that were carrying the basket of the boys. They abandoned the litter, and the basket of boys floated downstream until it rested on the water's edge. Here, a she-wolf mother found them, took them in, and let them suckle at her teat. Don't laugh. If you look in the visuals, you'll see him laugh straight away. They were raised as wolf cubs for years until a local shepherd stumbled across them and raised them as his sons. The twins, who did not know their true identity at this point, slowly grew in stature, reputation, and legend, and gained followers across the region. The king Amulius at one point seized Remus and kept him prisoner after suspecting his true identity. Romulus, his brother, gathered a force and attempted to free him. He did, and in fact the evil king Amulius was overthrown, and their grandfather Numitor returned to the throne. But by now, the boys had learnt of their true history, and so they decided to set out and build their own kingdom and city together, somewhere along the river where they were first abandoned. The twins disagreed upon which hill to build their new land. Romulus wanted to begin on Palatine Hill, while Remus preferred Aventine Hill. The dispute turned nasty, and Remus was killed in an act of fratricide. Romulus then went on to build the city of Rome, beginning on Palatine Hill. From there, Rome would slowly become the nucleus of the biggest, grandest, and most epic empire the classical world had ever seen. So, in today's podcast, we will attempt the mammoth task of condensing all the history of the Roman Empire into a triple episode podcast series from its birth until its death and with lots in between. So, strap in as we'll be filming these back to back. And I can honestly say, I think there's a high chance that Zach will start slurring his words by the end of part 3. So, stick around for that. There you go.
I guess in a way that makes this a drinking episode because my fridge is loaded up with beers and I drink quite a bit every episode.
Perfect.
For 3 hours and plenty of beers. It's 1, 2. God, yeah, I'm really fucked up.
Yeah, basically all the good analysis can be the first part, and by part 3, you just go, I can't believe that's how it ended. Oh, that's what it's going to turn into by the end of the show.
and now they got the fucking worst football team ever.
Who? Oh, Roma. Are they the worst football team ever? They're not particularly good right now, but they're not the worst football team
No, they've always
ever.
been a little bit shit, though. Like, they've never been that good.
They were quite good a few years ago. They won, oh no, it was the Conference League, wasn't it? It was with Mourinho. Honestly, they had a good team a few years ago. Tammy Abraham, Tamori.
Tell me around. That's more played for AC Milan.
Oh, you're right, it was AC
They're
Milan.
so
who,
forgettable, Joe.
so who played for Roma? I'm sure someone played for Roma.
The best players ever played for Roma is Francesco Totti.
Yeah, easy.
Yeah,
and he's one of the greatest Italian players
to ever play.
I love how Totti is. I mean, the only English equivalent in my mind of Totti is Gerrard, because I've never seen I've never seen a City. Well, there's many clubs have a one club man. That's it's not like they're the only ones, but I've never seen a City like fiercely defend and fight for that person. Like Gerrard is adored in Liverpool. It maybe not as much now because you've gone on to win the league since then. But Gerrard is a cult hero in Liverpool. Totti is revered like a fucking god in Roma. But I think the loyalty was very, because like I was in Rome last year. You talk to anyone, they would fucking tell you how much they adored Totti. Even Italians that aren't from Rome love Totti. It's kind of crazy. He's like this beloved figure. Anyway, I don't think we talk about Totti. Of course we talk about Totti. It's Rome.
Yeah, besides Romulus and Remus, Francesco Totti has to be the most famous man coming out of Rome.
It starts with Romulus and it ends with Totti. That's the lineage, the kings of Rome.
Yeah, they're like ancestors of each. Like when one soul passes away, the spirit leaves the next body. So Caesar is just a reincarnation later of Totti.
Honestly, it is funny that you say that, because there is this kind of legend to the men that do end up leading or ruling Rome in some capacity, and most of them, very similar to a lot of classical heroes, always try to pin their ancestry or their heritage or whoever back to the very first. So the Romuluses or people, emperors would say, "Oh, I'm actually Caesar's second great nephew removed." They would always try to do that type of thing because it was just that heritage is such an important part of the Roman story. Anyway,
what's the English equivalent? King Canute, William of Normandy.
I think English kings. Kings is slightly different because kings are, it is hereditary. So your claim of being a king is literally to do with how close you are to the throne. People would say, "Oh, I should be like William the Conqueror." William the Bastard did have a link to the throne. It was that I can't remember now. It was like his grandfather's brother's something is it? So I think even William the Conqueror, who was literally conquering from a different country in Normandy, still had that excuse. So yeah, I think there's plenty of examples of it. Anyway. Shall we continue? So that story I told about Romulus and Remus is a legend within the Roman Empire and just Rome as a city in general. But of course it's a story and we don't actually know exactly how much of it is true and not. Obviously, their mother being raped by the god of war, Mars, is probably a little unlikely, but we can't really prove any of that stuff, can we?
Well, yeah, we know that Mars is a dirty scumbag. Of all the gods, he's got to be right up that filthy bastard. I don't know how much our listeners know about with the Greek mythology and Roman mythology, but goddamn, like Zeus and Mars just raping everything. Everything that they're greedy myths on, it's raping.
Yeah, the gods did love a bit of raping, it's true. It's kind of a bit...
Sorry, trigger warning, guy.
You're saying that word quite a lot. Anyway, let's keep it moving. So basically, there's a more scientific version than just that story that I've said. It is believed that there are settlements that were built in that kind of Rome area at least like 5,000 years ago. But importantly to note, the Romans intentionally obscured many of these ancient foundations purposely for the sake of the version of their version of the story of Romulus and Remus. So even if there is more to it, I can't find much data on it. We can't find much evidence of it because the Romans specifically wanted it to be about the story of Romulus and Remus.
So like pre-turn of the BC, pre-Christ propaganda.
Yeah. Well, I mean, propaganda's been a thing since any civilization's been about. You always want to portray your message ahead of someone else. Yeah, so Romulus supposedly set down his stick and declared the founding of Rome on Palatine Hill in 753 BC on the 21st of April. Rome celebrates its birthday each year with a parade called the Natali di Roma, which means birth foundation of Rome, on the 21st of April. So if you fancy going, Zach, you and me. It's coming
That
quite
accent
soon.
sounded so good. Do you speak Italian?
I do speak Italian, yeah. Like, I might be coming at this with a bit of current enthusiasm because my partner is Italian, and I've never been to Rome until a few years ago. Now I've been twice, and I love it. It's easily one of my favorite cities in the world. So I do feel a lot of motivation to talk about stuff like this because I do think it's such a gorgeous piece of history in such a gorgeous city. Yeah, so if I do say something with an Italian accent, I'm sorry if that pisses you off. But yeah, if I say Natali di Roma, then it's going to sound bad. So if I go Natali di Roma, it sounds a bit better.
Yeah, what you guys don't know is that Joe told me off camera, he was like, I can't wait for this episode. Because I'm going to flex.
I did not say that at all. That was complete
He was
lies.
going,
That's propaganda. That's propaganda.
People studying my DMs going, wow, you have such a beautiful Italian accent.
Propaganda in the big 2026. Can you believe it? No, you've ignored my question. Do you not want to go? It's literally, I mean, this episode's going to come out on, I believe, the 16th of April. And it's the 21st is the birthday. Fancy going? We can fly over there?
I'm pretty bankrupt right now after being in Japan for the last 2 weeks.
I was more expecting a fun, oh yeah, go on, we'll buy some tickets and we'll go take some photos at the Pantheon.
I haven't got too much of a desire to go to Rome. Like, I just feel like it's going to be so...
Wait, hold on, an important question. Have you ever been to Rome?
No, and I love Roman food. I love the four Roman, the classical
You've
Roman
never
pastas.
been to Rome? No, well, I did expect you to go, yeah, let's go, Zach. And I would go, oh, well, I can't because my mum's birthday is the 21st of April, so it coincides. So I cannot go. But I won't.
Happy birthday, Sophie McKenzie, well-renowned author.
For next week, yes. Happy birthday, Mum. So now we're going to dive into the history of the city of Rome and then on to its eventual empire. So I'm not going to, I don't want to spoil what we'll be talking about in each part. This first part will be about the foundation of the city and how it starts to grow into this force that starts challenging all these other big powers in Europe. So that's how we're going to start part one, and then we'll go on from there. The official date, like I said, was 753 BC. That's when Romulus put down the stick on Palatine Hill. But really, that's the official date, but we don't know exactly when Rome's history began. Part of the reason we don't know much about it...
historiography, because we are a history podcast.
Well,
is there like historiographical evidence?
This is literally my next sentence. I'm going to say. So I'll just say it quickly. Part of the reason why we don't know for sure is that the Gauls destroyed a bulk of Rome's historical records when they sacked the city in 390 BC. So that's part of the reason why we really don't have much knowledge about many of the things that happened in the very, very early stages of Rome's history, sadly. I will also quickly, I'm not going to do this for every single people we talk about, but the Gauls feature quite a bit throughout this, so I might as well explain a bit more
it's
about
not
them.
Good for them.
They were a Celtic people, so links to like the Celts in Ireland and Scotland, etc. But the difference is that they lived on mainland Europe, mostly France, but also parts of Belgium, Switzerland, Germany, Austria as well. That's where they were by the time that they attacked Rome in 390 BC. So the line between legend and reality is quite blurred, really. The city of Rome had a line of kings that began with Romulus. Romulus was the first king of Rome. But after a certain amount of time, the citizens decided the tyranny of a king was beyond them, and they decided to elect a senate instead. Now, that's a really important detail because this will come back later on when we're talking about the Romans. They do not like kings. I imagine a few of those 7 kings, before they decided enough was enough, were quite bad, quite brutal, quite selfish, narcissistic maybe. But the point is that very quickly Rome decided we don't want kings, we just want elected officials. So the town grew in power and renown, and it built its first wall in the 300s BC, which is quite a big deal. It's like a sign of importance. You know, we've arrived if we're building a wall to protect ourselves. It's called the Servian Wall, which you can still see little bits of it today in Rome. It's over 2,300 years old, and you can still see parts of it if you go to Rome today. Now, early Italy is a very violent place. Like, yes, the Romans were brutal. Yes, it is. Yes, the Romans were brutal, but they all were. Back then, warfare was basically just glorified raiding. You'd attack a neighboring town or region, and you'd bring back slaves and treasures. That was pretty much how it worked. But what the Romans did differently from some of the other places around it, some of the other settlements and towns in Italy at the time, ancient Italy, was they would always keep a relationship with the town that they had just beaten up. They'd make sure, basically.
Stockholm syndrome gone mad.
Kind of. Well, yeah. I mean, they basically demand a consistent roll call of levies. So basically, levies, if you don't know, just means men able to fight that would answer whenever Rome called. So in a way, that's kind of a form of subjugation. But, like, it wasn't really, because, like, once they'd agreed that deal, they just let them be. They'd take what they wanted. They'd say, right, when we want, you're going to give us some men. And then they'd leave and go, right, you do you have some fun and deal with yourself. So basically, they could create the biggest army around when needed, and not all the time. And over time, they would eventually form these cordial and useful relationships with their neighbours alongside the levies. When enough times pass, they don't feel as angry or as bitter about what they've lost. Basically, Rome kept a good relationship with the people around them, even though they were still kind of subjugating them, bullying them at times. And so, by 238 BC, the Romans had expanded its rule over most of modern-day Italy. It controlled most of Sicily and Sardinia, and in the north it would be about to conquer Venice and reach the Italian Alps. But by now, other great powers in the Mediterranean were starting to take notice.
Carthage.
Yeah, Carthage. Well done.
Come on.
Good job.
Carthage has one of the greatest military generals that's ever lived.
And his name?
Hannibal?
Yeah, Hannibal. I was expecting you to say both. It's both. Yeah, it is Hannibal. No, you got it. It's Hannibal Barca is his full name. I mean, we do just call him Hannibal, but it's Hannibal Barca. So you're right. I'm glad you said Carthage. There's a few other big powers in the Mediterranean at this point, so you could have said a few others, but you're absolutely right. Carthage is the main one. Now, before we get into Carthage, the last time we spoke about a piece of history this far back was in January 2025, Zach, when we told the story of Alexander the Great and his conquering of the biggest empire the world had ever seen at that point. I said at the end of that two-part podcast that Alexander's death in 323 BC is counted by historians as being, do you remember?
The end of the Dark Ages.
No. The Dark Ages come after the Roman Empire.
Of course, yeah, because that's what happens. Because we still probably don't know about some of the inventions and the systems and processes the Romans had, which may even be relevant today. Like, they were so advanced for their time.
The answer was the beginning of the Hellenistic period.
Period.
Where Greek culture and influence dominated the Mediterranean. Alexander the Great's achievements were so great that the Mediterranean then had this boom of Greek culture and influence. That would only finish when the Romans then took over as the top guns, but we're not at that point yet. The point I'm making is, at this point, Rome is starting to notice that it might be growing, but there's powers on every side, not just Carthage, but also the Greeks, the Macedonians, the Egyptians, all over, that are starting to take note and are a little bit, I don't like the look of this big power that's coming out of mainland Italy.
Oh, really? So there's still echoes of like modern day globalization. But like you get people around the world hearing about certain rising tide, and they go like, we might have to stop that. That's they're insofar as saying.
Would you call that globalization?
Well, I guess not globalization. It's more like protectionism, isn't it? But like it's
yeah. But that's just conflict, isn't it? That's just how conflict works. You get those moments, those worries that certain empires have. So yeah, the first of these major powers to come into conflict with the Romans were the Carthaginians, like you said. So basically, some town in Sicily got into this big disagreement. It went tails up. It was awful. Basically, some of the townsfolk asked for help. They said, I don't like this other side of the town. They're arguing for these Romans. I don't like them. I've always felt Carthaginian. I always think you guys are my best. Can you come help me out, please? Can you come sort me out? Meanwhile, a settlement in this same settlement had also been sacked by the Romans and had been agreed to the levies and stuff, and that they'd protect and blah, blah, blah. So they said, excuse me, Rome, will you help us out? Because I got these townfolk over here that I disagree with, and I'm quite annoyed at them, and I think we might be about to get into a fight, and I think they're called Carthage as well, and I'm a little bit worried. Will you come help me? I hope you would.
So they're playing both sides?
No, as in like half the town split. The majority of Sicily is under somewhat Carthaginian influence. Meanwhile, for the Romans, once they sack that town, they get a bit of their own influence. They get a few that are, vehement defenders of this new Roman Republic, and they think, the Rome is the best thing. Carthage can't defend us. They get into an argument one day in this small town, and they ask for help from both sides. And suddenly, Rome has to make a choice. Does it defend its ally because this town is promised to help because it's created these alliances over time? But if it does accept and try to help, then it would be taking on one of the biggest and oldest empires of the region. And they decide they will help. So this conflict is known as the First Punic War. Now, Punic is actually just the name of the people that are from Carthage and the region. Carthaginians are Punic people. They're actually a Semite people, just like, Jews are.
Don't be anti. Don't be anti now.
Yeah, because then you're anti-Carthaginian, basically.
Yeah,
Anyway.
true, yeah. People in modern day, everyone thinks they hate Jews. They just hate Carthaginians.
They're just anti-Carthaginian. So basically the Punic Wars, and like I said, this is the first one. That implies that there are more. The Punic Wars in total, there are 3 of them, and they are a key part of Rome's history. They are fascinating, and honestly, I kind of wish they had their own episodes because they're just so much fun. But since
we will do an episode on the Punic Wars.
Yeah, I think we
point.
will. Since this is a podcast on the entirety of the empire, I will have to summarize, but don't worry, I will include the elephants. Do you know what that means?
Well, yeah, they used elephants, but I was wondering if you were making a joke about the elephant in the room.
No, I wasn't making that. I wanted to see if you knew what I meant by that, but I'm glad you don't. So let's keep going. So the first
they
Punic
did
War...
use elephants, though.
Yeah, they used elephants. So the first Punic War
What?
was... Don't worry, you'll get there. So the first Punic War was all about Sicily. It was primarily a naval war, but the issue was Carthage had the greatest navy of the region, while Rome didn't have any navy whatsoever. Apparently, the Romans begun by just inspecting Carthaginian warships that they could get their hands on and then just copying the design. But the genius of the Romans, however, was they would always play to their strengths. So if the Romans are a better land power than they are sea power, then Rome would create a land battle on the sea. So they created the corvus, which means in Latin the crow. It was a boarding vessel. So the crow had a spiked underside that would pierce and lock onto the deck of an enemy ship, holding the 2 vessels together. So they basically would ram into this Carthaginian vessel. And once they've rammed into it and the Carthaginians can't get away, the Romans would board the Carthaginian ship and fight man to man. Now, imagine the sight of that. Like, in general, naval battles are a thing, and there have been naval battles before that where you're fighting on ships, but in general, it's not much of a thing. But suddenly, if you're in the Mediterranean, you would see these huge ships, so often with like hundreds of men, suddenly getting onto each other's ships and fighting each other man to man with shields and swords and stuff like that. There are still remains, such as armor and weapons and shipwrecks, etc., of those battles that are down at the bottom of the Mediterranean Sea around Sicily.
That is so cool.
You can
That's
still
so
discover.
Cool.
Yeah, it's awesome. This is from a long time ago.
How deep is that part of the Mediterranean? It must be that deep.
I mean, it's deep enough that you'd need diving equipment, but it's not
Well,
so
the
deep
Mediterranean
that
is
you could...
not that deep an ocean yet, obviously.
But it's a sea. Like
paddle down.
the good news is that it's around Sicily. So if you're close enough to a landmass, then it's probably not super, super deep. But the Mediterranean Sea is still a sea. Like it's still going to be quite deep at the bottom. So the Romans and the Carthaginians fought the First Punic War for 23 years until the Carthaginians were beaten out and accepted defeat. So 23 years. I mean, it's obviously not non-stop. It's going to be on and off on occasion. But finally, the Carthaginians were beaten and they said, fine. They paid large reparations for this. And this was obviously a huge deal for Rome because, they had suddenly successfully beaten an actual empire far larger than Rome in terms of, the Mediterranean power balance. And yet they had beaten them after decades of fighting. However, the First Punic War wasn't the end because decades later, the Carthaginian general Hannibal Barca besieged, captured, and sacked the ancient Spanish city of Saguntum. Now, Saguntum is an ancient Spanish city where there was a friend of the Romans. By this point, Rome has quite a lot of influence in Spain. So Rome declared war, thus beginning...
What year is this in?
So this war was in 218 BC. And it's the Second Punic War between the two. This is the second bout of fighting between the Carthaginians and Rome. Now, out of the 3 Punic Wars, this is the biggest. And it was fought in 3 theatres. So it was fought in Iberia. It was fought in Northern Africa. Yeah, which is Spain. It was fought in Northern Africa, and it was fought in Italy. Now, you mentioned Hannibal earlier, Zach, and you're absolutely right. Hannibal is always mentioned in those top 10 commanders or top 10 generals list of all time. And to be honest, after hearing his achievements, in this war. I kind of agree. I'm not gonna lie to you. So this tale is unbelievable, right? So Hannibal has just sacked this Spanish city, right? And he is 29 years old at this point, so he's younger than us. And he basically performs a Nazis going through the Ardennes to trick the French. But he does it. But he does it on the Romans. While there were naval skirmishes at the beginning of the war, Hannibal took his army in Spain, the same one that had besieged the Spanish city, and he marched north through Iberia with his army. I believe he took with him 50,000 infantry, 9,000 cavalry, and 37 war elephants.
The army is that big in 200 BC. That would have thought it'd be like in the thousands, tens of thousands of infantry. That is like preposterous.
And the army was actually a bit bigger than that at the beginning, but he'd sent some home to help defend Carthage. But he took the rest, which is roughly around 60,000. So Hannibal took them over the Pyrenees Mountains through Gallic territory in France, and the Gauls at this point also had a good relationship with the Romans, or somewhat good relationship. And even then, they were kind of these barbarians that didn't like any invaders on their land, so they would often fight with using guerrilla warfare to push back when they could. They crossed the Rhone River. Now, you're probably wondering, how the hell did they cross a river, a big wide river with elephants? They laid out these huge rafts and then pulled the elephants along the river on the rafts using rope. And that way the elephants never got the impression that they were on anything other than land. They got to believe that they were still... Apparently some elephants would fall into the water, but they were just big enough that they could keep their trunk above the water. So even though the rest of them were submerged, the trunk was above and it just kept on walking.
Like a snorkel.
Yeah, basically like a snorkel. Then finally, they attempted to cross the French Alps, all the while being attacked by the local tribes. After 15 days in the mountains, Carthaginians, with their war elephants, reached the foot of the Italian Alps. So they're literally climbing mountains with war elephants, snowy mountains with war elephants. And by the end, they only had 35,000 men compared to their 60,000. So they'd lost a lot in these, guerrilla warfare battles and all the traveling. But all in all,
as well.
And illness and, all of it. But all in all, the crossing was not only an extraordinary move, but also just pure genius, because there were no Roman forces there to greet them. No, the Romans simply didn't believe that Hannibal would try to take elephants and 10,000 cavalry through mountains. No one's going to try and do that craziness. Romans obviously had to react. And over the next 15 years, they fought Hannibal in the Italian countryside, where Hannibal had conquered and laid claim for Carthage. Several of Hannibal's victories are some of the greatest military victories ever, including the Battle of Cannae. Now, I don't know if you've heard of Cannae, Zach, but I already knew a little bit about this battle because I'd watched a video on it previously, but I have some stats about it afterwards, which you'll just find unbelievable. But basically, this is, I think, possibly the most ridiculous battle or result of a battle I've ever heard. The Roman force was twice as big as the Carthaginians. So I believe it's somewhere like, in this particular battle, like 25,000 to 50,000. The Romans have the double the amount of the of Hannibal's Carthaginians. However, the Romans lost so heavily that we believe on that day they lost 80 to 90% of their troops. So,
killed?
Yeah,
wow.
Killed in one day.
What? Has there ever been a battle that bad in history?
I've got some stats because I thought the exact same. What the fuck? That's crazy. So this battle, to bring it back to something that we do know about, this battle inspired the tactics in the Battle of the Bastards. So Hannibal used the same tactic of pinning the bigger Roman army and then having
Ramsay bolted.
Yeah, and then having the shields with the spears in between and basically suffocating the army.
Oh, wow.
So if you've seen Battle of the Bastards, you know what I'm talking about. So listen to this. I actually got the numbers wrong, sorry. The Romans had more than 50,000. I think they had around 80,000 to the Carthaginian 40,000. So apparently the Romans lost roughly 50,000 to 70,000 soldiers in one day. Now, that represented nearly 1/5 of the entire Roman male population over the age of 17. Like, that level of massacre is similar to the British Army's first day at the Battle of the Somme in World War One. In fact, and this is the stat I thought was the craziest, the most one nation army people have ever lost in one day from a battle or a thing that's going to happen. Only the Battle of the Somme for the British and the firebombing of Tokyo in World War II lost one nation more people in one day than the Battle of Cannae.
That's not comparable. You can't
exactly.
You can't compare.
That's World War One and World War II.
Yeah, it's industrialized warfare.
Those are modern equivalents. This battle happened in 216 BC, and 50 to 70,000 Roman soldiers died in one day. I mean, I've heard some like really horrible, like people trying to explain what it must have been like in the amongst the carnage, because you're essentially watching like the biggest massacre anyone's ever seen anywhere. The soldiers on that day probably got PTSD and thought, I never want to see something like that ever in my life. There was just screams everywhere. Yeah, complete. I mean, I honestly can't even imagine it. Despite Hannibal's successes, the rest of the Second Punic Wars fronts were all going the way of the Romans. So although Hannibal was smashing it, he eventually had to retreat back to Carthage to protect his homeland from the oncoming Roman army. He was defeated. Go on.
That was under the command of Scipio Africanus, was it not?
Scipio, yeah.
Scipio Africanus, yes.
Yes. Yeah, who is also considered one of the greatest. He's the Roman general Scipio, and he's also considered one of the greatest military commanders of all time.
Yeah, I was going to say
because he beat Hannibal.
Yeah, it's like Norwich beating Barcelona. Paul Lambert would be considered the greatest manager in the world if he beat Pep Guardiola. I mean, with that,
great, what a comparison that is. So so he was defeated finally, Hannibal, at the Battle of Zama. Like you say, by Scipio Africanus, who was named Africanus because of his campaigns into North Africa, where that battle took place. This time, Rome took most of Carthage's overseas territories and restricted the size of their armed forces, basically destroying Carthage's empire.
Big Treaty of Versailles, Carthage.
Yeah, big Versailles vibes. Big Versailles vibes. They basically just said, you can't have anything, and you're in big trouble for what you started. And so they had Carthage suddenly after the Second War had no empire and no power in the region. 50 years later, in 151 BC, Rome used a conflict as justification to declare war again. Doesn't really matter what the conflict was because they were always going to do it. This begun the Third Punic War, but this one is a complete rout since Rome has already stripped Carthage of its power. Rome stormed the city of Carthage, sacked it, enslaved its population, and completely demolished the city. Rome took all of their territories, essentially beginning Rome's control of northern Africa and eastern Spain. The ruins of the ancient city of Carthage can be found on the coast of Tunisia.
There's still lie there intact today.
Well, ruins. I mean, like a few stones and
a few
building marks. Yeah, you're not
like an entire sea.
I mean, technically, the Romans later did end up building their own Carthage, but then that was also sacked down the line. So by this point, Rome had completely enveloped another empire, and around the same time had beaten down the other major powers in Greece, such as the Macedonians and the Achaeans. All of a sudden, Rome was the dominant power in the Mediterranean.
And this is the Republic times. This is like
Way, I love you keep doing this right as I'm about to say exactly that. So go on, finish your sentence, and then I'll say why.
So this is way before Caesar. Yeah. It's got a Senate. Is it the SPQR or whatever it's referred to? I think is like the acronym.
I think that's always what the Senate's called. But anyway, go on.
Yeah, this is like it's before. It's really far back, like before the Rome we all know and the Rome we all think about every day. Once the Roman Empire. This is like way before that. This is the Roman Republic.
Yeah, so you're exactly right. I'll say the sentence
Republic
I've got.
Is still like warmongery once an empire. So the Roman Republic is still like a military dictatorship in a way.
Okay, so there's quite a few things you've said there. So let me go through them one by one. Firstly, you're right. The Roman Republic is quite war-y because that is Rome. I mean, Rome is known for many things, but the reality was, as is the case for many empires, you become an empire or you become dominant in your region because you are the most brutal, the most militaristic, the most conquering of all the people around you, and you have some leg up against the other people that you're against. So yes, it is a republic. There is no one-man rule yet in Rome. I will recap. Basically, the age of kings that begun with Romulus ended only after 7. And after that, it's always been a Senate. And I will actually explain how the Senate works a little bit in the next episode. So we will get on to how that all works.
And this Senate has been in power stably for
Yeah.
like a few hundred years at this point.
Yes.
That is remarkable. Like,
Yeah.
really remarkable.
Yeah, and not only that, so far throughout this episode, I've just been referring to them as Rome, but you're right to point out they are the Roman Republic. That's what we consider them as now. They are not the Roman Empire. Even though this podcast will be called the Roman Empire for all 3 parts, we are technically not at the Roman Empire stage yet. In fact, the next sentence I was going to say, which is funny how you've come in right at that point, was that historians don't count this as the beginning of the Roman Empire, despite the fact that they now dominate all over the Mediterranean. And the reason for that being is that they saved the honor of it being an empire for when Rome creates its first emperor. And that won't happen for another 100 years. But the story of Julius Caesar, Marc Antony, Cleopatra, Cicero, Octavian will be saved for part 2 of our deep dive into the history of Rome, the fall of the Roman Republic, and the rise of the Roman Empire. So tune into that one to find out what happens in that one.
I'm gassed. I'm so gassed. That's it. That is top 3 history. That's
Rome's pretty cool.
Roman Empire has to be like at least top 5 history. If not Roman Empire, Caesar himself is like, he is
Caesar,
alone top 3 history.
Yes. So without spoiling anything,
World War II, World War One, Caesar. That's it. That's how it goes.
Without spoilers, a lot of part 2 is going to be about Julius Caesar.
Because
this is the thing, like I've just gone through from about 700 BC, arguably a tiny bit earlier, to around 200 BC or 150 BC. So that's a solid like 600 years that we've just gone through like that. All about the Roman Republic, all from the very beginning of the city of Rome building itself to eventually the Roman Republic being able to dominate all over Greece, Northern Africa, Spain, destroy the Carthaginians and all that. There's so many stories you could tell, including the Punic Wars. We could have gone into that in more detail. And there's so many stories you can talk about when the empire is the empire and what it would do. But the fact is, the most famous person associated with the Roman Empire is Julius Caesar. He is the name we think of when we say the Roman Empire. And for that reason, and also because it's a really interesting story, the majority of part 2 will be about him, and it's a lot of fun as well. And like I say, I will talk a little bit more about what it's like, what's it like within Rome, what all the main players. It will be a bit of a deep dive into this very, very crucial moment in Rome's history, and therefore, because it's such a crucial moment in Rome's history, it's a crucial moment in European history and therefore world history. So that's what we're going to focus on in part 2.
Can I ask before we finish off this first part of the Roman Republic? We say we're pretty much stepping away from it.
Yeah.
Almost instantaneously in the second episode. Are the legions a thing yet?
Yes.
They are.
So
you seem to have glossed over the legions though.
Look, there are. I feel like by the end of this, there's going to be.
I think legions, condors,
the legionaries, legionnaires. Sorry, look, and the centurions and all that. Of course, they're classic parts of the Roman military. But everyone has their own thing that they think of when they think of Rome. When I spoke about what I was researching with my partner, she asked if I was going to talk about another thing, and I said, to be honest, not really. Even though it is again something that you associate with Rome, we will talk about Pompeii briefly. But again, it's not going to be a big thing because this is the part. There's so much. I mean, Christ, this empire goes on for ages. Really, if I really want to do this properly, then I think you could do 5, even 6 parts about this. But then I think it would get a little bit tiresome of all the similar beats that we'd be discussing. For me, you have to pick and choose. And yes, the Roman military is important, but we all know it. I don't want to focus on the things that we know. I know we
have to at least in the next episode we have to talk about the makeup of the Roman army.
Well, why don't you do that? Well, I'll give you 2 minutes, and with all your expert knowledge, you can tell us exactly how the Roman army works, because there will be a lot of fighting.
I fucking will. It's pretty light, but I can tell you. You want to right now?
Okay. I can't wait because I'm going to have to, when I'm editing it, I'm going to get, that's wrong. No, that's right.
You want
that's
to
fine.
I'll
keep that in. That's wrong. That's wrong. No. Save it. Give them something, for goodness sake. Give the people
go
something.
Straight into it next episode, by the way, just so you know that now.
Okay, well, good. Well, actually, the very first thing we'll talk about in the next episode will be the Senate. So we can literally talk about the Senate, and then we'll talk about the army, and then we'll go on. So how about that? All right, anyway, this is enough end podcast stuff. This has been Pint-Sized History. I hope you guys enjoyed, and get ready for next week when we talk about the, like I say, birth of the Roman Empire and the destruction of the Roman Republic. See you then.
Bye.